Hey you guys, welcome back. My name is Tom, and today's video is a very quick one. This is just showing how we can modify normals to get our 3D objects that we're 3D modeling to perhaps look smooth or to perhaps look like they have curvature or customize that curvature without necessarily adding in additional polygons. Now, typically the way that we're taught to get something to look very smooth is by subdividing it or by hitting 3 on our keyboard to put it in what we call smooth preview mode. However, you'll notice that I have this asset right here. This is just a frying pan that I've very quickly modeled. And as you can see, it's fairly low poly. We can see the individual facets of the different faces that we have on the surface. And we don't want that. We want this to look smoother and more curvy. I also have poly count on, which shows me the amount of vertices that I have, which in our case is about 950. Now, if I take this object and do what we normally do, which is hit 3, to put it in smooth preview mode, this will give us that very nice curvy look. However, you'll notice that our poly count has jumped up from 1,000 to almost 10,000. And if I do this for all of them, you'll notice that it starts to really up the amount of vertices that we're simulating in our software. So what 3 does, what smooth preview actually does, is visualize what this would look like with a subdivision level of 2. And what I mean by that is what we're actually doing with these guys are we're taking this object and we are subdividing it not once, but twice to get this much geometry showing up on our screen. So here we have, if I take, the rest of these and also subdivide them up, now we have just about the same amount that we did before. So we don't necessarily want that. So I'm going to undo until we get back to our low poly model where we're back at 950 verts. And what we're instead going to do is we're going to soften the normals on these objects. So what I can do is I can select this object so it's outlined in green, go up to mesh display, and I can go down to soften edge. And this will soften all of the edges selected, which in my case is all of them on this object. And what it'll do is it will give us the illusion that this is nice and curvy. So you'll notice that we don't see those sharp edges, those faceted faces that we typically see, like for example on the handle right there. Now it looks a heck of a lot nicer and softer. And what I can do is I can select all of these mesh display and soften all of the edges. And as you can see, it gives us that look, which is nice. Now that being said, it only goes so far. If I zoom in really closely, you'll still be able to see the individual facets that we have as this circular shape is trying to work its way around. But it's not too terrible, and especially for some less important assets that we make that maybe we only view from far away, this is a really, really good opportunity to just have a very lightweight asset that doesn't take up a lot of computer processing time, that's not heavy to render, that's a little bit easier for your computer to handle. And this will come in very handy in very complex scenes. You'll also see this done in video games a lot too. So we can actually modify the normals of the objects that we make in here. Now, the same way that we can soften edges, we can also harden edges too. So for example, on these rivets that we have here, they're very simple, but they're giving me kind of this very funky look as the normals are trying to turn light away from this sharp 90-degree angle. What I can do is I can select those edges, mesh display, and instead of soften edge, we'll go to harden edge. And now it will create a very nice, clean knife edge, as if it was, before we subdivide or anything like that, just a very nice trim edge. However, since we only selected that edge loop, you'll notice that as we look around the cylindrical portion of the rivet, it still looks nice and circular, and so it's going to interact with light that way too. So you can do this on any edge that you still want to maintain its edge clarity, its sharpness. So for example, right there, now we've got a really nice pinch in that surface. And this is a really good way to get something looking very detailed or perhaps very smooth without actually messing with how high poly this object actually is. And that's really cool and important. I should note this also translates into RenderMan as well. So if you are rendering these assets, they will still look like they have softened normals. And this also translates into when you bring these objects into software like Substance Painter as well. So it's a very handy, nifty trick. If you don't want to go through trying to add bevels or creases, to your objects, or to subdivide it to a level that you don't necessarily want to bog down your computer with. Perhaps you know that you're making a very complex scene and it's going to have a lot of assets, and you want to make sure that a good bit of them are fairly lightweight. This is a fantastic way to get something to look nice and complex and have the surface detail and clarity that you want without actually spending too much into or investing too much into the poly count or the vertice count that you have on those assets. So hopefully you find this tip or technique helpful with your projects. If you do have any questions about that, let me know. Best of luck with them, and goodbye.